get started. So, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I'll skip my personal introduction this week as our moderators and panelists already know me. So today is our 6th and final alumni webinar, and we hope our fellows enjoy stepping back from project work each week to think about various fields within sustainability more broadly and to connect with our network of alumni and hosts. It's been such a pleasure to hear the stories of our moderators and panelists and to hear the thought-provoking and inquisitive questions from our fellows. While this is the final webinar of the summer, there will be many more to come throughout the year, as organized by the Alumni Steering Committee. Last week, we were joined by moderator Michael Behrman and panelists Anthony Albinil, Matthew Leroux, and Jackie Kinzen for a discussion on energy systems. And today, we are switching things up with 2 moderators and 2 panelists. When organizing the webinar series, I was particularly excited for this webinar because I strongly believe that communications is a critical skill necessary for inciting systemic change, but one that is sometimes overlooked. It's both a skill and a field that allows for immense creativity and understanding of psychology as well. Our moderators and panelists are from various sectors, including nonprofit, business, and academia. It's my hope that you all get a feel for the versatility of this work. So drawing back to orientation, I would like to remind our fellows that you are all storytellers, whether you are analyzing data or creating outreach materials. And I hope you approach today's webinar with an open mind and consider the importance of storytelling as you prepare your final deliverables and presentations. With that, I will introduce our moderators for the day, both from Revision Energy, also working with Lila this summer, Bridget Sprague and Brittany Angelo. So Bridget is the Vice President of Marketing at Revision Energy. She serves on Revision's leadership team as well. Within this role, she's responsible for the strategic direction of the company's brand, working to continuously evolve marketing efforts using customer insights, data analytics, and heart. A highlight of her marketing efforts has been overseeing the creation of Sun Squash, which we got to see during midterm presentations from Lila. Bridget was proud to welcome this lovable creature onto the Revision Energy team to help inspire the next generation to save the world. She joined Revision Energy after a lengthy career in advertising and marketing. After working with brands such as MTV, General Motors, and Stride Rite, Bridget founded her own brand agency, working with socially responsible businesses in New England. After 10 years and over 30 clients, she joined Revision Energy to use her knowledge to help fight the climate crisis. Bridget holds a bachelor's in economics and business management, and she has also earned a master's in industrial and organizational business psychology with a focus in consumer psychology from the Chicago School of Psychology. Now, Brittany is the regional marketing manager at Revision Energy, a role she has been in for 5 years now. She believes that environmental justice should be a focus in all that we do as humans, including business and personal practices. She is passionate about certified B corporations, changing the way we do business in this world, and is proud to be part of that movement professionally and independently. Brittany holds a bachelor's in environmental science and policy with a concentration in community and environment from Plymouth State University. And when she is not working, you can find her skiing, mountain biking, and paddleboarding. So with that, I'll pass it over to Bridget.
Thank you, Kendall, for the introduction. I do feel some pressure for us to make this a fun one since it's the last one. So Rachel and Jacob, Brittany, we got this. I also want to mention I am coming off of vacation, so my brain might be a little mushy, which might be a good thing for you all. I don't know. To continue the introduction, I am the Director of Marketing at Revision. It is a dream job of mine. I started out working selling SUVs for General Motors, diamonds, leather purses, leather bags, and whatever it was MTV was marketing at the time, which I can tell you was not music. That was one of the last projects I did before setting off on my own, was MTVU. We did focus groups around the country talking to college students, asking them what they wanted out of MTVU.com. And I will tell you that the skills that I learned working for these companies that I'm not thrilled with are skills that I use today at Revision Energy. So I'm glad I had the experiences. I'm even more glad now that I have 3 kids that I'm working in an industry that I believe in, that I care about, that my kids can be proud of me. As I communicate with them, everything that I'm constantly learning. Yeah, so at Revision Energy, I would just say, our marketing approach is listen first. The first project I did when I started at Revision was to actually speak with about 50 customers, prospects, about 50 employees, and really start to understand, what are the drivers. And I would say today that is the most important skill in marketing and communications, is actually not telling your message, but actually listening to the people that you're selling to, and really making sure that you're hearing what their needs are. Most exciting thing that's happening right now in our field and at Revision is growth, for sure. The number one reason why people go solar is because their neighbor went solar. So the more people who go solar, the easier it is for us on the marketing team. Our goal is not to create the best television ad or print ad or radio spot. Ultimately, it's to create the most amazing experience for our customers, because they become our marketing team. That is our priority at Revision Energy. And the most challenging aspect of our role right now is hiring, as many companies and industries are feeling. We could sell as many solar projects as we want to, but we can't install them because we don't have enough electricians. We don't have enough people in the field who are actually executing what we're selling. And so if you know of someone, please reach out. And with that, I'm gonna just ask Brittany to quickly introduce herself as well as my co-panelist.
Oh, thanks, Bridget. Hi, everyone. I luckily got to listen to all of you give your midterm presentation, so I feel like I kind of know you, even though not a single one of you has your camera on. It's fine. I'm over it, but I'm just saying I am going to camera shame you all if you don't have them on. No, it's fine. Yes, I think maybe like the most exciting thing that coming like recently out of school and finding Revision, which I always say I'm super lucky for time and place, because I was brought on to Revision after like not really knowing what I was getting into, having no idea what marketing was. And I, alongside Bridget and some other, but I did go to school for environmental science. And I always believed when I was in school, I had to be a field scientist. So I think it's really interesting to see where I came from and where I am now. And like Bridget said, I really do believe that this is my dream job. Some cool things that I think sorry, what else am I supposed to be answering? Oh, what's going on in the industry that I think is cool. I think you all are familiar with what B Corps do and are, but one thing that I think is really exciting about my role is I actually serve on the B Local board based out of Boston for all B Corps in New England. And I put on what's known as the BLD, so the Build Conference, which is the Business Leadership Development Conference for all of the B Corps in New England. So that's probably one of the most exciting things that I do on a daily basis that is related to B Corps, and Revision is very proud to be a B Corp. And then I think also just kind of not specific to our industry, but specific to the world and kind of where we are, what we're living in, and kind of where companies, I believe, really need to show up every day is part of our JEDI pillars that we've now launched. So Revision at the start of 2020 kind of doubled down on our Jedi efforts, and we created 5 different pillars, is what we call them. So employees within our company can join on to these passion projects and really further our mission in a bunch of different ways. But we as Revision recognize that there's an intersectionality relationship between environmentalists and social justice, and we want to make sure we do our part to highlight that work. So those 5 pillars are advocacy and partnerships, expanding the clean energy reach, retention and mentorship, which kind of goes hand in hand with hiring, education and training for those who are on staff, and then culture and talent development to always just keep holding Revision accountable to our mission. So super excited about all of that work that fits under my role as marketing, but also the greater picture of communications. Bridget, I'll pass it back to you, I guess.
That's right. Thanks, Britt. And yeah, let me just say, I am incredibly lucky to be working with Brittany every day. So yay, it's nice we get to even work with each other on this. So we are introducing Rachel and Jacob, who will be, we'll sort of have a roundtable discussion. I'm going to ask a question, you'll answer, I'll ask another question. You guys know how this works. I'm not going to give too much detail into Rachel and Jacob's background because you guys get to do that yourselves. Thank you for showing up today. So Rachel Usher is the project manager at Georgia Climate Project, and Jacob Nelson is the communications coordinator at CISA, which is Community Involved in Sustaining Agriculture. We're going to start off with Rachel. You're first on my list. And the first question for both of you is, who are you? What is your current role? I'm actually, there's like 3 questions in one. I hope that's okay. What did you study? When did you graduate? And what is the organization for whom you currently work and the role within that organization? I hope you got all that.
I also have the questions pulled up, so I will also be deferring to my other screen to make sure I get everything. But hey everyone, thanks so much, Bridget and Brittany, for helping to host today, and thanks to Kendall and everyone else for setting this up. It's great to see some Zoom squares for all the current members of this cohort. I had such a formative experience working with the Vermont Department of Health, but my current professional role, I am a project manager with the Georgia Climate Project. We're a consortium of 9 colleges and universities in the state of Georgia looking to address what a changing climate means for Georgia and what we can do about it. I also partner, I'm technically an Emory University employee, so I also work with the Emory Climate and Health Research Incubator, which is trying to fund cutting edge climate and health research here in the southeastern United States. And within that organization, I feel like I put on many hats. It's kind of weird. We're like a nonprofit housed within academia. I feel like I call myself a professional people wrangler, from helping to get PIs or academics that are really senior in their career communicate to the public and to government agencies about the most up-to-date research on climate science, to mentoring graduate students who are helping us with social media and stories pieces. And then also in this role, I've been really responsible, and that's why I was excited to hop on today, done a lot of storytelling, partnering with different videographers to really highlight individual humans, not academics, that are out there in the real world getting climate solutions done in the state of Georgia, and really just lifting that banner high that there is work that's being done and a lot of positive momentum to build on. When did I graduate? So I graduated last year, right at the beginning of the pandemic, from Emory University with a Master's of Public Health and Epidemiology. Funny that it was in the middle of a pandemic and I didn't work on COVID-19 response. I really wanted to work on climate because I think climate touches everything, and there's all sorts of intersections, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic. Before that, I graduated in 2016 with the Bachelor's of Ecology from the University of Georgia. I thought I wanted to study freshwater streams, and I have totally taken a pivot from that. But similar to what Bridget was saying, how really disparate experiences working on lots of things that you don't actually wind up doing for your career are hugely influential in sort of my day-to-day and how I communicate with both other, with experts in the climate field, and also communicate out to the public with public-friendly communication. So happy to be here today, and I will turn it over to Jacob.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Rachel. You're up, Jacob.
Awesome. Thank you, Bridget. Nice to meet you all. Yeah, who am I? Easy question. I think I met a couple of you during orientation, some grouping of you earlier. I just did this last year, so I'm fresh out of my fellowship. So Rachel pretty much is as well, but we're not far from where you're sitting right now. Let's see, what's the best way to tell this story? I guess so. I did not think I would wind up working in communications at all. I went to school at a very small school in Vermont, Green Mountain College, and I self-designed a major that was called Sustainable Community Development. And what I was interested in was just how do groups of people make decisions that can affect a sustainable future, whether that's town government, whether that's any group of people you could think of, whether that's a community action around something. I saw that community scale action as the biggest leverage point that we could really affect to move our country and our society in the right direction. National felt way too big, and just talking about individual change felt too small to me, and that felt like a sweet spot. I had always been really interested in how much everything ties back to food. And I could say the same thing about energy as well. And I think those two things are very, very linked. And what slowly started to dawn on me, I think was two things. One was that a lot of the messes that we're in as a society right now, well, maybe that's not true, because maybe there's a lot of more complicated things going on. But in terms of the climate mess, which was the thing at the biggest thing in my brain when I was in your shoes and when I was going through my undergrad degree, is we have technological solutions to a lot of this stuff, right? We can do rooftop solar everywhere. We have a lot of other things that can plug in. So the struggle is not technological. The struggle is all about people. And it's all about listening well enough to get people on board behind a solution and negotiating and facilitating how we move that forward. So I was starting to realize that. And at the same time, something that was really large in my mind is just that when it comes to a movement, the sustainability movement, and us as a community of sustainability professionals, there's a lot of people doing communications work, talking to people, telling stories, trying to move people and groups in the right direction. And we're up against these behemoths who are really good at marketing and really good at communication. I'm thinking big oil. I'm thinking industrial ag. And there just aren't enough people on the sustainability side, in my mind, that are leveraging those skills to move our agenda forward. And so I didn't think that I would end up working in communications, but the more I learned about kind of where my skills aligned with where I thought the world needed to be, it just seemed like I was moving in that direction. So I graduated from Green Mountain College in 2020. Nope, that is not true. In 2018, I spent a year working abroad at a boarding school in the Bahamas, farming and teaching. That was interesting. I came back. I was farming oysters when I got the call that I'd been selected as a fellow for last year's program. I had a fellowship with the New Hampshire Food Alliance, working on this big research project, talking to a bunch of different people from around the food system in the state of New Hampshire, asking questions about what the state could do to build a more climate resilient food system, one where farmers and the whole food chain can adapt to changes that climate change is bringing and work to mitigate how bad those changes will be, which were really interesting questions to ask in the middle of COVID, because there was a lot of overlap there in terms of where we get our food. And from there, that position was an immediate springboard into where I am now at CISA, which now as, I don't even think you have to be a communication professional to know that community involved in sustaining agriculture is a mouthful of a name. And if it wasn't a 29-year-old organization, I would be saying something about changing that. But that's where I work now, in a junior communications position. My organization works with local farms in Western Massachusetts to provide business and marketing assistance. We're one of the buy local organizations in Massachusetts. There's one for every region. We get a little bit of state funding, and then also donations and go for private grants as well to do this work. Half of my colleagues work in technical assistance, helping farmers with business planning and that sort of thing. And then me and my other colleagues work on the consumer facing side of things. So I run social media. I help organize radio and other media opportunities to get the faces of these people that are growing our food and part of our food system in front of everyone and tell their stories in a way that humanizes that. And I write a weekly column for some of the papers out in Western Massachusetts as well. I talked for too long, I'm sorry, but that's kind of my story. That's where I'm at, and that's how I ended up here. So good to meet y'all.
I appreciate your story. And actually something you said was really interesting to me. I hear it a lot, which is I didn't think I would end up in communications or in a communications role. A lot of people in marketing and communications, first of all, like in my title on LinkedIn, it says, not all marketing is evil. Like I definitely grew up thinking marketing is evil, to some extent, because we're all trying to get in folks, your brains and convincing you to buy stuff you don't need. But in fact, you can use marketing and communications for good. And clearly, Rachel and Jacob, you are doing that. I so appreciate you. I actually would love to do a quick, just to get folks engaged for a second, a scale of 1 to 5. I think it's called a chat storm. Brittany's teaching me. How many of you think you'll end up working in some sort of communications field when you graduate? 5 being absolutely, 1 being absolutely not. So ready, set, go. Yeah. Cassandra, nope. Awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate that. 1, knowing that you're listening, and and 2, the engagement. There. So we're going to jump to our next question. By the way, just to let you know about timing, at 1:40, our plan is to turn it over to you all to ask some questions. So I guess the next question I'd like to know is specifically about your fellowship that you had. You both did recently, more recently than certainly I did any sort of fellowship in school. How was that experience? And, how did it help you in reaching sort of the goals that you wanted to reach and where you are today? Jacob, we'll start with you. You just, I would say like 3 minutes. How's that?
Sure, yeah, or you've been quicker. I think one of the things I loved about my fellowship was the community of doing work and coming together weekly with people like you to just rehash, like, what the heck are we doing? Why does it matter? how do we tell stories about it in a way that other people care? I don't think that happens very often where you have just touch points in your job where you get to ask those questions and just realign yourself weekly with what you're doing. It'd be great if we all did that. I don't think it happens that often. So I loved that, and that helped me answer those questions for myself. The other thing that I really took away from this fellowship was, part of our job as fellows is really to figure out like what you don't like, what you're good at, what you're not good at, and to network and to figure out your place in the professional community. And those are habits that I've tried to carry into my positions after the fact, even though they're not explicitly part of that experience the way they are as part of this fellowship. So yeah, I think speaking broadly about the fellowship experience, those are the two things that stand out to me looking back on it. Bridget.
Thanks, Jacob. Rachel, your turn.
Sure. So when I showed up at the fellowship, I got to work with the Vermont Department of Health to complete a model. Basically, the long story short, we were trying to figure out, if Vermont were to meet its transportation goals that it set out in its state climate assessment plan, what would both be the climate benefits and the health benefits of that? So basically, Americans are very inactive. Vermont is not an outlier. And every single minute you can get more people to walk a few extra steps to the bus stop or get off at a single ride cars and walk or ride a bike. That has huge benefits both for emissions from those vehicles and also has like crazy huge benefits in terms of chronic disease, heart disease, diabetes. All of these things play into how inactive our population is. So it was this perfect fusion, and it's such a dream 4 months for me to fuse two of my huge passions, which are studying public health and chronic health outcomes, and also, realizing that when we can address climate solutions, it can be a huge health benefit for populations. So what did I learn in that role that I really took away? I tell you what my day-to-day looked like was walking into the Vermont Department of Health, turning on a computer, and I was coding just like a coding queen all summer, trying to clean a lot of messy data. And while that was essential to get the outcome of this model, the most important work that I did, I'm convinced, was communicating it. Because if that model output or that information is not digestible to all sorts of different stakeholders, from local government people in Burlington to AARP of Vermont, like if it's not a digestible, easily understandable format, policymakers don't know how to move, why should we prioritize this? Why does this save the state money in terms of healthcare costs? Why does this help us meet our carbon emissions? So taking really complicated things, really messy science, people don't want to know the details, they need top line messaging, and figuring out how to pivot from one brain to the other is really important. And I would challenge some of the ones out there in the chat, if you think you're like, I'm going to be an academic, I'm not going to have to communicate, or I want to, work on, data and all this other things, like for those things to have impact, you have to communicate it well. Whether it's within, your graduate program, grad school program, to funders, or, to clients, you really have to be able to explain what you did and why it matters. So I'm so big on comms, and like Bridget said, I never thought I would be in a role that's so comms heavy, but scientists really need to be able to talk about the work they do because it's so critically important. So can't say enough good stuff.
Can I tag back in for 1 second, Bridget?
Please.
Okay. I explained a bit about my fellowship earlier, but I'll just say that echoing Rachel's point, yeah, a lot of the work I did in my fellowship wasn't, it was a lot of like data and interviews and behind the scenes stuff. And the end result of it was a massive written report. Thumbs up or hands up in the chat or whatever if you've done anything in school or for work that just ends up as this massive piece of writing that you're not sure if anyone's going to give a crap about. So that's where our work isn't done there. if no one's reading it or no one's caring about it, then there's still a little bit of work to do, right? And so that's where communications is important. And I'm actually still involved a little bit with the New Hampshire Food Alliance, translating that report into top line messaging. I like that phrase, Rachel. Just like, okay, we then broke that down into who needs to understand this, who could benefit from this information, what's the best way to message to them. And then we're working on communications materials, graphics, and other things so that we can work with getting the messages about how to build a climate resilient food system out to small farmers, out to extension agents, out to grocery stores, out to consumers, things like that. So yeah, that's the piece I'll add, and we can move on.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to try to sneak in 2 more questions. The first one, I'm going rogue a little bit because we're talking about how important communication is. And I'm curious for both of you, like what's on the top of the list in terms of what makes great communication? Like how do you take something hard to understand, hard to communicate, and turn it into something where people are actually digesting and then engaging and, you know, interacting with what you've shared with them? Rachel, I'm going to start with you first.
Yeah, I think it's, I feel like with all communications, and my best friend actually got a degree in comms, and we talk, and I'm like, I don't actually have formal structures for these things, but I think knowing your audience is a really good place to start. If you're going to be communicating something hard, you have to know, am I communicating this at, you know, a 6th grader can understand this, or is this a college student, or is this a politician? Like they all sort of require sort of slightly different framing in terms of what you're communicating about. I think biggest challenge I see, because I just work with amazing scientists all day, is that they want to put a million caveats on everything and use language that is not accessible. And so, you know, I feel like there's, you know, scientific jargon has gotten quite a bit of, you know, recognition, but I can't tell you how important it is to partner with different people and sort of have this iterative process to really assess, like, what is, you know, who are we communicating? What's the main point? And like, can they actually understand this with the basic knowledge or whatever knowledge they're coming into it that they have? So those would be, I think that was the question. Okay, great. Okay, cool. I'll let Jacob go now.
It's a tough question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I loved your answer, Rachel. Know your audience. I feel like I'd answer this question differently every time, but what popped into my head immediately, Bridget, was metaphors and figurative language. When you're trying to explain something really complex, give people a, you know, something they can picture in their head. Metaphors, visuals, keeping it simple, and keeping it based on stories, right? One of my favorite phrases in communications is numbers numb, stories sell. And that has steered me away from a lot of poor decisions in how I'm trying to communicate to people over the years. So those are, maybe I'd answer it differently tomorrow, but I find metaphors very useful. I find visuals and graphics very useful. And yeah, I'll echo the whole, knowing your audience is an iterative process. You got to see, like, did my communication, like, did what I say make it through to anyone? And that's something I struggle with in my job, because a lot of my job is speaking to a general audience that eats food through social media, which you can kind of track metrics, but then also the radio and the newspaper. And you have no clue who that got through to unless they like email you and say, great article, which happens occasionally. It'll happen to some of the farmers I work with, and that's wonderful. But that's something to keep in mind too, is how can you evaluate how well you're doing with this kind of thing? That's something I continue to struggle with and continue to talk to my peers about how to do better. So.
Awesome. I'll just add on with Revision Energy, you know, we definitely tried to get as many people as possible to tell the stories. It's people don't believe companies, they don't believe organizations when they tell you something as much as they do their family and friends and, you know, coworkers and neighbors. And so the more we can educate our customer base, the more they can communicate our message, you know, the more, the larger, you know, we'll end up growing, which means a wonderful, you know, mission of decreasing carbon in the atmosphere. So it all comes down to, you know, the type of information you're communicating, but also who's communicating to folks. So finally, I would ask, with our 3 minutes left, what advice do you have for the current fellows as they embark on their summer experiences? Jacob, why don't you go first?
Sure. Trying to think of things I haven't said already. I'm
also happy to let Rachel go first.
if you want to, yeah, I don't need to hold the floor with silence. If you have an answer right now, Rachel, I'll tag in after you. Otherwise, I can keep mulling.
Sure, I'd be happy. I'm reflecting back to the time when I was in this fellowship. I was in between the 2 years of my 2-year master's in public health. And so I already really had job hunt on the brain. And I know a lot of fellows are, you know, in different transition points where they're thinking about what their next step is. And I think even broader than communicate, well, it is communications, you're kind of selling yourself, but I cannot emphasize how important, meeting people, doing good work, and like really maintaining the network. I emerged from grad school in the middle of the pandemic when the job market was just freaking out, and set in 50 to 60 applications online for different jobs. And the offers that came through, one was from all of those crazy apps, and 2 offers came through because people knew I was looking and I had done great work and I had networked with a community here in the Southeast. So like, people want to know you as a person. And so these existing connections are invaluable for any future work that you want to develop moving forward, and also, having the art of meeting people that you do want to build if you want to go a different direction out of, whatever, networking strategically. I know networking was a huge focus when I was a fellow. I'm sure it is this year still, but just like from my 1-year test run, I cannot emphasize how important it was. The second thing I'll say, and especially as a recent graduate and working with a lot of current students now as well, is just be really open to feedback and critique. I know there is so much good lessons to be learned from people who are more senior, and like really taking the time to ingest and like be really receptive to feedback can only help you build, whatever skill set you're really looking to build. It's so valuable. And I know it can be hard sometimes to receive feedback on things that you worked really hard on, but it will make you a stronger, professional, and to help develop you for whatever kind of team you're working with in the future. So those are just 2 sort of writ large pieces of advice that I've thought a lot about since my 2019 fellowship.
Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah.
How are you doing, Jake?
I'm doing great. How are you, Bridget? Those are perfect, Rachel. I would like to Control-C and Control-V those as mine. No, I mean, yeah, I can't say how important networking and meeting people was to my experience, and how it personally benefited me to be a fellow. So I have to echo that. These are kind of random, but I'll drop 2 little nuggets and then we can move on to questions. One is I found it really helpful as a new professional in any field to reach out and learn from people you're working with and people in senior positions near you, but then also just to some of the basic research in industry and trade news that is in your field, whatever that might be. Like, for example, in the food world, I read a lot of Civil Eats and The Counter, which are just periodicals about sustainable food systems and what's happening. And look to organizations like Food Solutions New England, which is also actually part of the UNH Sustainability Institute, and is a leader on how to communicate about food systems specifically to New England audiences. So understanding like who in your field can like help you understand and just, you know, be better at your job, and carving out a little time and some habits to look at that thing. The other piece of advice, and maybe this is just like off base for some of you, maybe it's a little bit out of left field, but I wish someone had told me this, which is just, if you were like me, and maybe some of you aren't, maybe some of you have been out of this pattern of very seasonal existence between academic years and summer jobs and things like that. But I really didn't have a lot of time outside of that. And now I am just in my first year of a new job where I don't have an end date. It's indefinite, right? It's a whole different mode of being when you're outside of academia, outside of school, and in professional life. And I really push back against the idea that like anything before that point isn't the real world. I think that's BS. But I do think that it's important to be gentle with yourself as you adjust to just a new lifestyle, way of looking at the world, way of evaluating yourself. And maybe that's a little broad, but that's what I got. So
That's good stuff.
yeah.
I so appreciate that. Okay, Britt, I'm handing it off to you.
Great, thanks, co-moderator.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel and Jacob, so much. And I'm excited to hear what questions the students have for you all.
Yeah, so as we transition, you all are better at this than I am. You do what is best for you, whether it be raising your hand or writing your question in the chat. But I think one thing that Bridget and I mentioned, and something that I hear a lot of when I'm talking to younger students getting started in their career is like, people always ask me, why do I say revision is my dream job? Like, what makes this job so great for me? So I think while we wait for some more questions, if I may ask you another question, is like, why this job? Why not go work for your biggest competitor? Like, what drew you to this company, this nonprofit, this work? Rachel, why don't you start?
Sure. I had the pleasure of getting hired by Georgia Climate Project while I was still a graduate student. So I did internships during my master's program with them. And why GCP initially attracted me, I know I'm a bit of an outsider in this fellowship program because I am a Southerner, but I grew up in Savannah, went to school in Athens. I've lived in North Georgia. And the opportunity to really work in a state that means personally so much to me, and I see the impacts of a changing climate on, my folks and my family and my communities. Having that fire for being in the weeds and being in the nitty gritty, it's really helpful when I zoom out and I talk to my peers and I talk to my family, and I realize how impactful and necessary this work is in the absence of state-led climate action from our, very interesting political climate here in Georgia. We have to start doing this work. And so that's, I think, that's why I'm here, as to spread the good word here in Georgia.
Thanks. Jacob, let's hear from you, but try to keep it short for me so I can make sure I get to Meg's question too.
Yeah, totally. Brittany, the question is just like, why do I do what I do, basically?
Why this company? Why this work? Why not your biggest competitor?
Yeah. I think I just always want to be involved in conversations about how we do food better as a country. And I had been farming directly, and that just wasn't I wanted to be part of the conversation at a larger scale, and was lucky enough to find employment in like the farm adjacent community, still working at that community scale that I really wanted to be part of when I was back in school. And there's not a lot of jobs like that. So I took the first one. Sometimes that's how it goes. There's always
Honesty.
silver linings to that and new things you learn.
That's great. Thanks. All right, Meg, floor is yours. Nice to see you again.
Great. Yes, good to see you. And thanks everyone for being here. This has been really interesting. One of my questions is kind of, and I think Jacob, you're talking about this a little bit earlier, like if you're not trained in communications, like my first question is like, how do you feel like you can become a better communicator, which I feel like we've kind of touched on a little bit, but I wanted to ask more directly. And second, how do you cater communication styles to different audiences? Because I feel like sometimes, especially depending on who you're communicating with, like the traditional maybe approach that some people fall into, or I'm just thinking more environmentalist, like doesn't always work. So like, how do you figure out the best communication style to use? And that's open to anyone.
All right, I'm going to jump in.
Great.
I think I started out by saying, the best piece of advice I can give you when it comes to marketing and communications is listening. And I think that's true for both of your questions, right? The more you can listen first to your audience, learn about your audience before you speak, the more they're going to stand up and pay attention to what you have to say. Because, if you walk into the room, at Revision Energy, for instance, there isn't one audience. We sell solar for residential customers, for commercial customers, for schools, for nonprofits. We work with investors. We have, 20 different audiences that we're talking to. We cannot walk in the room and say the same thing to every audience. We really need to think about and talk to them and ask them, what it is, what are you looking for? Those why questions. There was one book I read during my master's program, and I honestly don't remember what it was, but essentially it was encouraging you to ask like why 6 times, right? There's an answer that you will get the first time you ask your why. Why did you go solar? Oh, it's affordable. But if you continue to ask that question, why, you're actually going to get to the heart of the issue, the emotion behind their decisions. People don't go solar because of the financial component. That is interesting. It's a must. If it's not affordable, they're not going to buy it. But the reason why people go solar more often than not, when you ask that why question 6 times, is because of their kids and their grandchildren. And they care deeply about what this earth and the experience that their kids are going to have after they're gone. And that is true oftentimes for business owners as well as residential homeowners. But you don't know unless you sit down and you really ask them why, and you really care about that answer. You're not just asking the question so that they feel heard. You're asking the question so you're learning. Yeah, that's my response.
I think Bridget, you nailed it. And I mean, beyond that, just practice. Like, I mean, you're gonna have opportunities. It's not going to be perfect. I have done communications that have failed, and you learn what works and what doesn't work, and you need to do better moving forward. You really taking the dive is, I think, the best teacher.
And I'll just add briefly, love what you said, Bridget, and you, Rachel. And don't forget that like there is a lot of survey research and other like tested, science out there about what messages sell, to what messages resonate with people, no matter what you're talking about. And I don't know if this is the case, but I've always worried that the environmental movement in particular and the movement for sustainability sometimes ignores messages that actually work just because they're the ones we've heard, since the 80s, when that's not really what's resonating with people. And there's another way to get that across. I don't know. Yeah. Basically, read the science. There is good science out there about what works.
Nice, thank you. Ariana, do you have a question you would like to ask?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I had a question, well, for everyone, but I really appreciated Rachel bringing up scientific jargon. And I think that's definitely a pitfall that I have and fall into, mostly because I find it very difficult to convey the uncertainty in some messages. And I'm worried that if I don't use this kind of very ambiguous scientific language, then I might come off as biased. I'm just wondering how often you all grapple with unfair bias in your communications.
I will say thank you for your question. I think about this all the time. We're doing an overhaul of our website with the top 3 climate impacts for the state. And when we say our coasts are flooding, yeah, there's a billion different NOAA predictions based on, what warming scenario are we under, how much resiliency has been built up, what things are going in place. I think, and I'm speaking from my world in Georgia, in my perspective, the communications of the climate crisis, there has been this, scientists have used a lot of hedging language for a long time because they wanted to convey the uncertainty. They wanted to convey, the nuance of the models. And I think it's taken a lean towards, since I guess we don't know, the default in a state and in a place like Georgia is largely inaction. So I think, communicating on what you do, not lying is not the answer, but communicating strongly on the points that there, for example, in the Southeast, there's a lot of people saying, wow, every hurricane that hits, they're like, is this climate change? Is this a climate hurricane? And the scientists, you talk to meteorologists and they're like, no, we can't say that. But what we can say is storms are becoming more intense closer to land. So they're getting really big right before they hit. And we can say with certainty that that is a product of the climate crisis. So I think it's a lot of creativity and understanding, what's the action that you would want people to take? And hopefully in a state like Georgia, it's better emergency preparedness because we're going to be dealing with this for a long time, and figuring out what the right fact is to communicate it. And if there's a ton of uncertainty around something, you can't lie, but you need to figure out how to convey that feeling of urgency that you need to get across. But there's some real experts. I will flag for our people who want to see an amazing climate communicator, Dr. Marshall Shepard, who works with us. He's a geographer and meteorologist at the University of Georgia. He has TED Talks and talks about, he goes to spar with climate deniers on Twitter. And my goodness, this man is an expert. He's also on the Weather Channel all the time. Having scientists that really, have this seasoned way of talking and communicating about all the uncertainty. He's an amazing example to go look at about really what you can do within the parameters of, saying what you know and saying what you don't know. But it's an art, and even really, it's a constant evolution of trying to figure out how best to say it and updating it with the most up-to-date science.
I think one thing that I just want to add to what Rachel said, which is awesome, you don't overnight just become amazing at speaking. It builds up time over time, talking after talking about the same things. So I would also say the professor that Rachel mentioned has clearly been working at that for a while. So just keep practicing too. Don't be afraid to practice in front of your family, practice in front of your peers. But yeah. Jacob, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'll add briefly, and then hopefully you have time for one more question. I would just say that sometimes when you're trying to convey something about perhaps, I'll use Rachel's example of is this hurricane, climate induced, basically, or is the extremeness of this hurricane climate induced? Sometimes you don't have to communicate that head on. Sometimes you can just tell a story about the human impacts of flooding because of some of these storms. And it's almost what you don't say that is the message. And that's another communication strategy that kind of sidesteps the whole scientific jargon. It would work in some situations, not like, not others where you do need to be, explaining the science in some way. But that is one strategy I have used, and I think resonates with people around that.
Thank you. Bridget, anything you want to add, or are there any other questions too?
I was hoping there was another question. I don't see one.
I don't either.
I guess, yeah, I'll just add, for revision energy, it's interesting. We, on the marketing and communication side, we don't typically we don't focus on the details. The details will not sell our projects from a marketing and communication standpoint. Our sales team, which are also solar designers, they're educators, our whole company, one of our differentiators is that we consider ourselves educators. So the sales team, once they're sitting in front of someone one-on-one at the kitchen table, that's when they get into the details. But when it comes to marketing and sort of big picture strategy, our goal is to make people feel really great about our company and our brand, so that they're comfortable giving us a call and then asking those detailed questions. We don't need to get into the details at our level. The one-on-one conversations, absolutely, because then we can specifically hone in on what it is that they need to know. But ultimately, when it comes to our brand, our goal is to create the best possible experiences so that people feel comfortable coming to us. They feel like they can trust us to offer up those details when it's time. But yeah, so we don't necessarily have to worry about, the sort of scientific jargon at our level.
And thank you, Bridget. And I think with that, I learned a lot. I think I also will just mention, Jacob mentioned it a ton earlier in the talk, but use of metaphors. I'm starting with Lila, if you all remember her midterm presentation. I'm doing a lot more education. So I have a ton of hands-on experience talking to younger kids, but I think if you can break something down that is scientific data and explain it at a 4th grade level, I always say that it's going to stick with adults. When it comes to solar, I think the hardest thing to explain is the net metering process, which I'm not going to explain it right now, but I just picture whoever I'm explaining it to is a 4th grader and knows nothing about how the grid works. And then it makes a ton of sense. And I use metaphors to help explain it. So looping that final question back, Jacob, Rachel, you both were amazing. I learned from you. I hope the rest of the group of students also learned from you. Bridget, I'll talk to you in a little bit, but I always learn from you. You're a great mentor. I'm happy to be on this panel with you. So thank you everybody for sticking with us for the full hour. Kendall, did you have something you wanted to share?
I'll close this up real quick. But thank you. So I know we're at time, everyone, so I'll be quick, but just once again want to thank Bridget, Brittany, Rachel, and Jacob for a wonderful panel. You guys are also engaging. Also really great to reconnect with Rachel. She was in my cohort. And just to our fellows again for your attentiveness and your curiosity and passion that you've expressed throughout the summer and webinar series. We really appreciate it, and we hope you've enjoyed these webinars as well. And I just want to re-echo 2 kind of themes that I kept hearing throughout the webinar, and that's one, that communicators are good listeners, and then also this the challenge of how to humanize communications and the power of story and human story. And so I think those are really great takeaways, and I hope you guys can go into the end of your summer with using this advice and think about how you are going to communicate your deliverables and your presentations so they really have a lasting impact. And so with that, thank you everyone and have a great afternoon, and I will see you at presentations. All right, bye-bye.